For most people, middle-class life feels safe, not because it is perfect, but because it is predictable. A steady job, a familiar routine, bills that can be planned months in advance. For a long time, this was enough. It created the feeling of control, of stability, of progress. And for decades, that feeling was justified. But every major crisis reveals something uncomfortable. The habits that once kept people safe stop working. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but quietly and consistently. These habits were not mistakes. They were learned responses to a stable environment. Between the mid-20th century and the late 1990s, careers were longer, housing cycles were slower, economic shocks were rare and often localized. In that world, planning made sense. Consistency was rewarded. Stability reduced risk. So people adapted. They built lives around continuity. And over time, those behaviors became identity. They were no longer just financial choices. They were signals of being responsible, of being mature, of doing things the right way. The problem is not the habits. The problem is that the environment changed, and the habits did not.
Middle-class systems assume one thing above all else, that income continues. Monthly obligations, long-term commitments, structures that only work if cash keeps flowing. As long as income arrives on schedule, everything feels balanced. But modern crises do not attack assets first. They attack cash flow. In 2008, millions of people were technically solvent. They owned homes, they had retirement accounts, they had equity. What they didn't have was access to cash when income stopped. The habit was not reckless. It was optimized for a world where interruptions were brief. That world no longer exists. Comfort often feels like security. Familiar routines, fixed locations, commitments that lock life into place. In calm conditions, this feels grounding. In unstable conditions, it becomes restrictive. When industries shift, when regions decline, when costs rise unevenly, the ability to move, to adapt, to change direction matters more than certainty. But flexibility is usually the first thing to be sacrificed. What remains looks stable until movement is required.
Most middle-class planning assumes disruption is temporary. A few months, a brief slowdown, a return to normal. But recent crises have shown a different pattern. Recovery stretches longer than expected. Labor markets return unevenly. Entire sectors disappear. Plans designed for brief interruption begin to erode. Not violently, but gradually. Pressure accumulates. And what once felt prepared starts to feel exposed. Another deeply ingrained habit is waiting for clarity, for official signals, for visible proof, for consensus. In stable systems, this reduces mistakes. In unstable systems, it creates delay. By the time outcomes are obvious, options are fewer, costs are higher. Waiting feels safe. But under pressure, waiting often hands control to circumstances. And once circumstances take control, choices shrink.
These habits share a common assumption, that tomorrow will resemble yesterday. Crises violate that assumption. They do not reward optimization. They reward adaptability. They do not reward precision. They reward resilience. Middle-class habits are not wrong. They are simply calibrated for conditions that no longer dominate. Crises do not punish recklessness first. They expose rigidity. The habits that fail are rarely extreme ones. They are the comfortable ones, the reasonable ones, the ones that worked until the environment changed. Under pressure, even good habits reveal what they were really built for.